epic home features that disappeared into the future. Imagine you're living in the 1980s and your favorite song is playing on the cassette while you wait for your dinner. Suddenly, you hear creaking sounds, metal trays clinking, and ropes rustling. It's clear that something is coming. Well, it's your dinner, right at your table with the help of these dumb waiters. But wait until you hear about the other uses of this dumb waiter, because it's gonna make you think we're fools to ever discard them. If you live on the second floor, you already know how hard it is to constantly take your laundry from one floor to another. Dumb waiter was a one-stop solution for people in the 90s for all their floor-to-floor problems. And what comes next might surprise you. The dumb waiter wasn't just something royalty used. It was even installed in houses of the working class, so they don't have to take food all the way to the second or third floors, saving the extra work. Talking about work, dumbwaiters almost revolutionized the domestic help system. Here's how. After the culture of having dumbwaiters became normalized, people didn't need as many servants, so the labor was cut to almost half by just installing dumbwaiters in your home. It didn't just save money, but also saved food from spilling all over your expensive stair rods. And while we're on the subject of food, dinner and TV go hand in hand. But you wouldn't guess how the historical TVs transformed into our modern-day LCDs. Imagine a Victorian house with printed wallpapers, wooden furniture, and pastel pink sheets. And in the middle of the room, you see a giant box, and it's far from what you'd expect. It's a TV, the biggest invention in the 1900s and the most expensive gadget of the time. Picture this. An aristocratic family gathered around the TV, watching the people move on the screen as they impatiently wait for their favorite sitcom to start. The mechanical sound of buttons clicking fills the air, and when the theme song finally starts playing, everyone's eyes start to glow. But hold on. This isn't just about TV being a portal to the universe. This tale is about it being a significant home feature. TVs were so massive at the time that at one point, people started using them as decorative devices. But guess what happened next? People started decorating their TVs with lace fabrics. Some made TV covers out of wool, and the grandmothers strictly advised everyone to keep the TVs covered when no one's watching. But you know where the nostalgia really kicks in? Remember when you got on top of your roof during winters to adjust the antenna and find that sweet spot of clear screen so you can watch something in peace? The massive TV, antenna, and TV covers all have disappeared into the future now. We don't even see them in our houses, and massive flat screens and streaming devices have taken their place. But the feeling of navigating a sweet spot with the antenna still remains unmatched. And on the subject of navigating, can you guess how people actually navigated their day-to-day life before smartphones? Well, they had a massive book that solved half of their problems. Remember what it was called? A phone directory. Remember going through those yellow pages, trying to find the contact number of a pizza joint so you can get some food with your family? That's how much impact phone directories had on all of our childhoods. But their peculiar origin story would surprise you. In the beginning, not a lot of people were ready to get their name and address published on public directories. Even businesses were hesitant. But then something happened that completely changed their perspective forever. It was the dawn of marketing, and it changed the world of communication forever. What really happened was that 50+ businesses got published in phone directories, and they started getting massive business. And that started a massive rat race, and the yellow books with tiny little numbers made their way to our coffee tables and drawers. However, what came next was completely unpredictable, and no one saw it coming. Phone directories suddenly disappeared from the house, and instead, everyone started buying those small phones with buttons so they can keep their phone book private and save their contacts easily. And talking about privacy, there's another great feature that took conversation privacy to a whole new level. Remember when the phone rang and the first thing you did was run towards a tiny little alcove placed in a corner? The structure was similar to a cabin, but it was way more than just that. It was the heartbeat of every house, a sacred space where people whispered all their secrets and laughed or cried. It was a gateway that connected family and friends, called a telephone nook. But guess what? The original purpose of these nooks will definitely take you off guard. These telephone nooks were specifically made to keep conversations private in public places, like restaurants, train stations, and offices. However, how these nooks turned into symbols of luxury will actually shock you. After telephone nooks were a huge success in public places, the uber rich started using them in their homes for added privacy. And guess what happened next? In a few years, telephone nooks became a staple in every household. But there was one little hiccup in their popularity. These nooks were made from really expensive wood, so people weren't able to afford them. Some resorted to getting cheaper wood while others saved money. But no one could have predicted what happened next. As time went by, the telephone nooks became outdated and were eventually lost in history after the advent of mobile phones. And on the subject of phones, you won't believe what the alternative to mobile phones was back in the days. Remember waking up with the smell of freshly made pancakes and then rushing towards the street to a mysteriously large box? It took a lot of space on the sidewalk, but no one seemed to mind the hassle. And before you start thinking that it was a UFO, here's what it was: a phone booth. Phone booths have been around since the early 19th century, but get ready to have your mind blown, because the reason for their massive popularity will drop your jaw. Although phone booths were present on most streets, they weren't as popularized until the movies. There are so many movies and sitcoms that use phone booths as a major plot point. Remember that hilarious episode from Friends, where Ross rushes to England to mend ways with his estranged wife? What's the first thing he does? Yes, you guessed it right. He stops by a phone booth to call her. So pop culture obviously had a lot to do with popularizing phone booths. And by the mid and late 20th century, every street had a phone booth. But you won't believe what happens next. Phone booths suddenly become irrelevant, and the reason will leave you completely off guard. Once everyone had their compact phone in hand, no one needed to make calls through phone booths. So, a lot of them were discarded. But wait before you hear what some countries did to phone booths. They actually colored the original red boxes and made them a decorative item for their streets so they look even more beautiful. This is actually pretty genius of them, because using vintage stuff as decoration is the new norm. And talking about vintage stuff, radio has to be on the list because it was the most talked about technology at one point. But how it was lost into oblivion and became merely a decorative item will leave you in shock. Imagine a time when you're welcomed from school by soft melodies of 70s classic music. You enter the house and everyone's already waiting for you at the lunch table, while a strange device plays music in the background. Your father tells you that he has bought you a present, and it's this box. Then you spend several years gathered around that box, listening to your favorite episode. And that tiny box that took hardly any space in your house, but showed you the world was the radio. Radio was a machine that was popularized in the early 20th century, and the next thing might leave you speechless. It wasn't just a device with random noise, but it broadcasted news from across the globe, and even brought music from the 30s and 40s to your humble abode. But the radio was a lot more than just that. The sound of its dial clicking, the static humming and filling the entire room with music and happiness. Radio entirely changed the way we get information, and it became a must-have in every household. But then, something changed and we forgot about the existence of radio, the feature that decorated our home for decades. But what exactly changed? You would be shocked. Radios were actually pretty popular even after TV came around, but when television became colorful and more channels started going on air instead of just one, people didn't need to listen to radio anymore. And the tale of radio ended with everyone having dinner, sitting in front of the massive box called TV. And on the subject of having dinner, post-dinner ablutions have also seen quite a change over the years. We wash our hands after dinner on sinks, but wait until you hear about the origin of these sinks and how people in the 1800s and 1900s washed hands. Imagine you're done having your chicken pudding with your family. It's a warm winter evening, and you're surrounded by your family. After having dinner, you walk towards a cabinet that has a bowl and a jug on it. If you're seeing this for the first time, don't be confused because you're in for a treat. These cabinets were found in every household before the formal sinks were invented. They were mostly kept near dining rooms or main doors so people could wash their hands easily. Have you guessed what these really were? You might not believe it, judging from the photos, but these actually were washstands. Yes, this cabinet, bowl and jug were used for washing hands, and there were slightly bigger cabinets as well. And their usage is also pretty interesting. Bigger cabinets had all sorts of oils and soaps so the noblemen could wash their hands and afterwards smell like fresh flowers, and prepare to be amazed by how these cabinets changed over time. As time went by, indoor plumbing became more common, So, the bowl and jug were replaced by the first ever version of modern-day sinks, and washstands were eventually lost because of advancement and indoor plumbing. And when it comes to indoor plumbing, it wasn't the only home improvement happening in the mid-19th century. There were a bunch of electricity-related changes that revolutionized our daily lives without us knowing. And it might surprise you, but one particular wiring system was a part of this revolution, and you didn't even know about it until now. It was called knob and tube wiring, the basic wiring system in all households before our super fancy systems were introduced. But you won't believe what I'm about to reveal next. If you have knob and tube wiring in your old house, just check it out sometime, and you'll see that its porcelain is still pretty intact. Although there was a little hiccup that changed people's attitude towards knob-tube wiring. And the reason will shock you. Knob and tube wiring was pretty efficient for the time, and even advanced because people used limited gadgets. But your toasters, coffee makers, air fryers, and air conditioners would have wreaked havoc on the wires. Knob and tube wiring wasn't really made to take massive load from multiple machines. And that's when a man decided to change a few things, and can you guess the results? Knob and tube wiring was eventually replaced. Not all at once, but slowly. And now, most of our homes have wires that could withstand massive pressure. So even if we use our washing machines the entire day, it wouldn't make a difference. Well, washing machines aren't the only things that take up a lot of power. Their parents were just as ruthless. So the year is 1848. A man is having a really hard time washing his clothes by hand, and he decides to make something that takes up little to no man labor. It might be a surprise, but he actually succeeded in making something workable for washing his clothes. However, what comes next will shock you for sure. Although the origin of this machine was in 1843, it took almost 100 years for this machine to actually be used in our houses. Remember the golden era of watching television and then stopping by your laundry room from time to time to keep a check on a massive mechanical marvel? But it's far from what you probably imagined. It's a wringer washer, but not exactly a modern-day washing machine. This was an extremely efficient machine, and how it worked will leave you in a trance. A wringer washer actually used two rollers, and they squeezed the water out of clothes while putting enough pressure for all the dirt to also squeeze out. It made washing clothes so easy that it made its way to every teenager's chore list. But the next thing that happened changed the way we see wringer washers. As time went by, people started getting busier with their daily lives. They didn't have time to stand by the laundry room and watch those massive rollers spin for hours. So, a smaller and more efficient machine was a need of time. This realization changed the washing world to its entirety. Sleek and faster machines took the place of wringer washers, and now we have automatic machines that not only wash but also dry and iron the clothes for you without making constant noises like a typewriter.